They say every woman has one story she never tells. This is mine. When I met John, I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for truth, on stage, in life, in myself. He walked into rehearsal like a secret that had already chosen me. He wasn't conventionally handsome. He wasn't trying to charm anyone. But when he spoke, there was something about his honesty, quiet, raw, almost holy. He made the air shift. We were rehearsing for a play that neither of us believed would last. It didn't. But we did. At least for a while. I was 28, still hungry, still fragile, still wondering if I deserved the stage. John was older, already part of something bigger. The Godfather, Dog Day Afternoon, the kind of roles that burn into history. But none of that mattered to me. What mattered was how he saw me. Without decoration, without disguise. With him, I wasn't the actress. I was just Meryl, sitting cross-legged on a wooden floor, eating Chinese takeout, dreaming about the kind of art that saves people. He had that kind of faith, that art could heal, that performance could be truth. And I followed him into that belief like a prayer. We moved into a small apartment in Tribeca. It had creaky floors and leaky windows, and it smelled like paint and coffee, and everything that felt alive. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Two actors chasing light in a city that devoured dreams. He'd come home from rehearsal and collapse into a chair, reading me lines from scripts. I'd imitate directors. We'd laugh until the neighbors banged on the walls. And then one day, he coughed, a deep, sharp sound that made me freeze. He waved it off. Just the city air, he said. But it wasn't. It was cancer. Aggressive. Relentless. The kind that doesn't wait for curtain calls. When they told us, I felt the world tilt, like the set had collapsed mid-scene. He didn't want pity. He wanted to work. So he did. Even as his body betrayed him, he went to the set of The Deer Hunter. His hands shook, his eyes dimmed, but his spirit, my God, his spirit was unbreakable. I visited him every day. Hospitals are cruel places for people who love beauty. They smell of endings. I brought flowers that he couldn't smell, read him poems he barely heard. But he smiled. Always smiled. As if he was trying to make me believe it wasn't happening. I tried to be brave. To be the woman he saw in me. But every night, when I left his room, I'd cry in the elevator, silent, animal cries that scraped the walls. People told me to rest. They didn't understand. When you love someone who's dying, rest feels like betrayal. Every second apart feels stolen. The day he couldn't stand anymore, he whispered that he didn't want me to see him like that. I told him too bad. I already had. I held him anyway. His skin was cold, but his hand still squeezed mine. When he died, I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I just stopped. Like my own script had been ripped in half midline. I remember leaving the hospital at dawn. The streets were empty. The sky was gray. I thought of all the mornings we had planned and would never have. New plays. Coffee. Growing old. Ordinary things that had suddenly become sacred. Grief is a strange companion. It doesn't announce itself. It just moves in, rearranges your furniture, and makes a home inside your chest. I went back to our apartment, the one filled with echoes of his laughter, and found the landlord waiting. He said I had to leave. The place was in John's name. "I'm sorry, Miss Streep," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It's business." Business. The word cut like glass. I didn't argue. I packed a box, one with our scripts, his sweater, and the coffee mug with a chipped rim he used every morning. That was all I could carry. A friend, a sculptor named Don, offered me his spare room while he was away. I didn't know it then, but he would become my husband. At the time, he was just a kind stranger with a quiet house and walls that didn't echo with ghosts. I slept for days. I dreamed of John standing in a spotlight saying, "It's not over." But it was. And yet, something inside me refused to die with him. When they called me for The Deer Hunter, the same film John had been working on, I almost said no. How could I act when I could barely breathe? But then I thought of him. He had given everything to that film. Maybe finishing it was the only way to keep him alive. So I went. and the camera rolled. And for the first time, I didn't act. I just felt. Every tear, every silence, every look, it wasn't performance. It was mourning. It was love turned into motion. The crew didn't know what to do with me. I was too raw, too real. But I didn't care. I wasn't there to impress. I was there to survive. When the movie came out, people said I was brilliant. Critics wrote about emotional depth and truth. I read their words and felt nothing. Because the truth was simple, I wasn't brilliant. I was broken. And the world had just watched me bleed. After that, doors opened. Roles, awards, red carpets. But I carried his absence like a secret talisman, heavy, invisible, sacred. He had believed in me before the world did. And every time I stepped into a new role, I whispered to him, "This one's for you." Years later, someone asked me if that loss made me stronger. I said no. It made me softer. It made me listen.
To pain.
To silence. To the small, trembling parts of life that most people rush past. John taught me that greatness isn't loud. It's gentle. It's the hand that reaches for yours when you're falling apart. And so, even now, decades later, I still see him sometimes, in the corner of a dark theater, smiling that quiet smile. Watching, as if he knows that every time I stand under the lights, I am still standing for both of us. Grief doesn't leave. It just learns to whisper instead of scream. For months after John's death, I lived inside a kind of fog, the world muted, colorless. Even laughter felt like treason. But life has a strange cruelty. It keeps going whether you're ready or not. I threw myself into work because standing still hurt too much. Every rehearsal room smelled like antiseptic. Every stage light looked like hospital glare. But I kept going. I had to, because if pain was all I had left, then I would make something beautiful out of it. I moved my few belongings into Don Gummer's apartment while he was traveling. At first, it was supposed to be temporary, a safe place to breathe. The walls were lined with sculptures, pieces of frozen movement. They reminded me of John somehow, of permanence born from fragility. Don would send postcards from his trips, polite and kind. "Take your time," he wrote once. "The house is better with you in it." When he returned, I was still there. I hadn't meant to stay, but his presence was quiet, anchoring. He didn't try to fix me. He just let me exist, messy, mourning, halfway alive. Sometimes that's the greatest act of love, the willingness to sit beside another person's ghosts without flinching. We married later that year, privately, quietly, with no grand declarations. People whispered that it was too soon. Maybe it was. But grief doesn't follow etiquette. It only asks for mercy, and Don gave me that. For a while, I kept waiting for guilt to knock on the door, for John's shadow to rise and ask, "How could you move on?" But it never came. Maybe because love doesn't compete. It just transforms. I didn't replace John. I carried him forward. Into every line I spoke. Into every character I breathed life into. When Kramer vs. Kramer came along, I was newly pregnant. The irony wasn't lost on me, playing a woman torn between motherhood and identity while still trying to understand both. The role terrified me. It wasn't just acting anymore. It was confession. On set, I felt split in two. Half mother, half artist. Dustin Hoffman was intense, brilliant, unpredictable. Sometimes his energy scared me, but it also sharpened me. We clashed. We respected each other through the fire. The film became an emotional marathon, and when it ended, I wasn't the same. Winning the Oscar felt hollow. I smiled for cameras, thanked everyone, went home, and sat on the floor with my baby in my arms, wondering how to be both women at once. The applause was distant. Her heartbeat was real. That became my rhythm for years. The oscillation between stage lights and night lights, between scripts and school recitals. People like to call it balance. But balance implies stillness. I was never still. I was constantly moving, constantly choosing, constantly forgiving myself for being human. Hollywood didn't know what to do with women like me. They wanted ingenues, not mothers, faces, not voices. So I learned to be both, and neither. I learned that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, "I'm still here." I started seeking roles that demanded more than beauty, roles that scared producers, that made them say, "She's too serious, too old, too intense." To me, those were compliments. When I read the script for Sophie's Choice, I didn't know if I could survive it. The pain was biblical, a mother forced to choose between her children. But somewhere inside, I recognized the same ache that had followed me since John's death, the impossible cruelty of choice. The camera didn't see an actress. It saw a woman remembering what it feels like to lose the irreplaceable. After that film, everything changed. Critics began using words like genius, chameleon, icon. None of those words mean anything when you're doing the work. You just show up, raw, open, terrified, and hope the truth comes through. By then, Dawn and I had 3 children. Our house was chaos, laughter, paint, broken toys, and endless noise. I'd leave for set at dawn, shoot until dark, then come home and step on Lego bricks in the hallway. It kept me grounded. Stardom is a fragile illusion. Motherhood is the ultimate reality check. People often asked me how I managed it all. I'd smile and say, badly. Because the truth is, I dropped plates, missed phone calls, forgot birthdays. But I also kissed scraped knees, read bedtime stories, and still learned my lines. Not perfectly, but sincerely. Somewhere in that mess, I found peace, not because I had everything, but because I stopped apologizing for wanting it. Hollywood kept aging, but women in it were expected to stay 29 forever. I refused. When the wrinkles came, I let them. When scripts stopped coming, I waited. Then I started saying yes to the ones that scared everyone else. The old witch, the Iron Lady, the matriarch, they called them unlikable. I called them real. I remember the first time someone called me brave for playing a woman my own age. It made me laugh. Brave is standing beside a hospital bed, not wearing less makeup. Brave is living through love and loss, and still showing up for work the next morning. I think about John often, especially when people talk about legacy. He never got to see mine. But he built the foundation. He believed I was capable of something extraordinary long before I did. And Dawn, he gave that belief a home. That's the thing about love. Sometimes it doesn't arrive once. Sometimes it evolves. One teaches you passion. The other teaches you peace. Both make you whole. Years later, I returned to the stage where I had first met John. Same theater. Same smell of dust and memory. Different woman. I stood there alone, the house lights dimmed, and for a moment, I felt both of them. The man I lost and the man I found, standing somewhere in the wings. Watching. Proud. If grief was my first teacher, endurance was the second. And grace was the final one. The kind that doesn't demand attention, but simply endures, quietly, decade after decade. People still ask what the secret is, to longevity, to success, to staying relevant. There isn't one. You just keep showing up. You keep learning. You keep letting life break you and rebuild you in new shapes. Every time the camera rolls, I think of that girl from New Jersey, the one who watched people and imitated their gestures, not knowing she was preparing to live 1,000 lives. I think she'd be surprised by how much she could endure, by how much she could love. I've played queens, mothers, victims, warriors. But the hardest role I've ever played was myself, learning to stand still inside the noise, to forgive the past, and to keep walking toward the light. When I look back now, I don't see tragedy. I see a story of continuation, of one love ending and another beginning, of art born from pain, of a woman who refused to disappear when the script said she should fade out. And maybe that's the point of it all. We don't save the people we love by holding on to them. We save them by becoming what they believed we could be. So, if somewhere in another world John can still see me, I hope he knows. I didn't let the story end with him. I carried it forward. And I'm still telling it.